Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's Video Podcast. Today is Saturday, January the 22nd, 2022. A lot of twos in the air today. Today's going to be the first in a series of shows on one particular book, and the book is called On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. Let me put the book up here so you can get a little look at it. We'll put up the white copy of the book here. All right there. All right, so this is the front cover of the book, On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by Timothy Snyder. Timothy Snyder is a professor of history at Yale University. He has about 15 books out that have been published in 40 different languages. He's been prolifically seen on a few shows on television lately, and Rachel Maddow has had him on a number of times. The original book was a little sort of 3x6, real polemic, no pictures, nothing real splashy, but about 100 plus pages, and it was a cute little book, very nice, and with a lot of good information in it. But the new book is a graphic version of it, and the graphic version is absolutely stunning. There's more information. There's a lot of interesting graphic designs done in this book here, and Timothy collaborated with a Nora Krug, who also has quite a little history of dealing with one of her books is Belonging, A German Reckons with History and Home. So these people are really familiar with what's been going on in Europe over the last century. And what they're doing is they're applying the 20 lessons from the 20th century to modern times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit from the prologue of the book just to give you a sense of it. And then next week we'll do chapter 1, the week after that chapter 2. Chapter 1 will be Do Not Obey in Advance. The tools that I'm going to use are, in back of me I put the time chart that I've used in the past, starting with when I was born, 1944, and ending with, well, I squeezed in 2020 when Biden got elected here. So I've got this little timeline across, and I'm going to show you a few of the different tools we'll use, and they're mostly books and articles and that type of thing. And I'll probably start off with the Devil's Chessboard. The Devil's Chessboard brings us with Allen Dulles, the CIA, and the rise of America's secret government. The rise of America's secret government. So we'll get that down, and the other book we're going to make reference to is Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism. This is another blockbuster book. Hannah Arendt is a really interesting woman. She's she actually taught political philosophy at the New School for Social Research back in the 50s. And this particular book was serialized in the New York Times in the late 40s, early 50s, published in 1951. And it is without a doubt the definitive guide to the rise of totalitarianism. And we're not just looking at the right, the fascism, we're also looking at the left, the communism from Stalin's Russia. So she's anyway, it's an amazing book, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff in it. So we're going to use, that'll be another tool we're going to use. The third that jumps to my right now is this has been sitting on my room here for the last couple of years. This was a New York Review of Books review of two books, and the two books that they're reviewing here, this is almost 2 years ago now. They thought they were free, The Germans, 1933 to 45, and Broken Lives, How Ordinary Germans Experienced the 20th Century. So these are the three tools, the three books that I've got that I'm going to use, in addition to current articles that are in the newspaper, sort of talking about the things we're going to be talking about. So that's by way of a little introduction. The Hannah Arendt, interestingly, Tim Snyder, I'll keep that on the side. Let's put that book up on the side there, because I made a I went out of my way to put this on a black background so that it wouldn't interfere. Alrighty. So, and I guess I should be over here a little bit so we don't block the book off. Okay, so Hannah Arendt, there was Timothy Snyder won an award for the Hannah Arendt Award for Political Philosophy. And I've been following this gal for quite a few years. And like I said, her writing is really amazing. These people really dug into what happened. And we're going to try to see if we can figure out, well, what happened and what are we going to do about it? Because if we just keep letting things go the way they're going, we are sliding into an authoritarian fascism right now. We're literally sliding into it as we speak. The Republican Party has become the party of Trump. The few people within the Republican Party who seem to have some rational thinking about themselves are still stuck in the Republican Party. The few people that voted against Trump, two of them I think are still in the Congress, and the rest of them are either not running or they've dropped out or they're retiring. Liz Cheney becoming a hero of all people. The people who are becoming heroes are just absolutely mind-blowing nowadays. The people who are goats 10 years ago are now becoming the doves of the 21st century. In addition to that, there's at least a half a dozen other people within the Republican Party who appear to be rational Republicans, but they don't seem to be moving in the direction of voting with the rationalists. They seem to be stuck in this Trumpian mode, in the Trumpian mode, when I refer to Trump, I see Trump as a gangster, period. He's a gangster. The guy's a gangster. We'll talk a little bit about his history as I go along here, but the great-grandfather, the grandfather, and his father are all involved with illegal gangster activities going back to the 1800s with the whorehouse in the western states, right up to the present-day Donald, who learned what he learned from Fred, his dad, who was totally in bed with the Gambino family. And that's where Fred Trump learned how to shill the government, how he learned how to overprice things on one invoice and underprice them on another invoice. So in other words, if somebody was, say, getting a refrigerator replaced in one of his houses where he kept black people out of very consciously, but he had a whole little checkoff system, he would tell the government that he spent $5,000, and he would actually pay maybe $500. So it was one of the ways he's manipulated the books. Donald learned the same type of bookkeeping, which is completely endemic throughout his career and now being brought to light by the Attorney General in New York. So, and it was Roy Cohn who brought Donald Trump into the New York scene in the early 80s. Donald's father, Fred, said, hey, don't go into Manhattan. I don't know these guys there. Roy Cohn, the sleaziest lawyer in American history, the guy that got the Rosenbergs into the electric chair, was Nixon's lawyer, the one who taught Nixon how to do the big victory sign, which Roger Stone to this day does. Roger Stone was basically a student of Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn died in, I think it was 1988, of AIDS, and that's when Donald stopped doing business with the Italian mob and started doing business with the Russian mob. That's another story I've talked about a number of times. So anyway, Trump's a gangster, and he uses gangster tactics, including threatening people. And if you follow what's going on with the attack on democracy in the country right now, these people who have stood up for the truth of the election have been literally threatened either directly by people from Trump's immediate group or the underlings who are feeding into his rhetoric of violence. The rhetoric of violence is the main tool that this guy uses out there, and they have threatened people with killing them. We have this recent case of the guy in Texas, just on the news the other night. This guy in Texas is threatening a Georgia election representative. He's going to kill him, and he goes on to Craigslist. He's on Craigslist soliciting somebody to go do to whack this guy in Georgia because he voted that Trump lost the state. I mean, this stuff is madness what's going on. And a lot of us don't want to really follow what's going on. Many of us are numb to the politics, and people are frustrated, etc. And so anyway, the point of the show is I'm going to try to sort of be informative, dig out what's in this book here, make it relevant, and see if we can find a blueprint to move forward. So moving right into the prologue, the book starts and he's talking about how the founding fathers in the beginning looked at the ancient democracies, especially in Greece. And this is what was used by the American and the European intellectuals in the 1700s to develop these democratic principles. Things have devolved over the years, and we certainly don't have what we aspire to, but we are aspiring to it. So we wind up in America as this democratic republic. Along the way, Aristotle warned that inequality would bring instability. Inequality would bring instability, and you can see the inequality is a direct result of capitalism. Capitalism breeds inequality. This is a topic I've talked about in the past. I did the whole 5 shows months ago about neoliberalism. Capitalism breeds inequality. The other thing that was sort of jumped out at me here was Plato. Demagogues exploit free speech to instill themselves as tyrants. Demagogues use free speech to instill themselves as tyrants. Well, if this isn't Donald Trump, he's a poster boy for that statement by Plato. And the guy has tyrannical attributes about him right and left. So we live in what's called a democratic republic, so we don't have direct votes on everything, so we elect representatives who then represent us. We get this democratic republic, and within that system is where, well, with television and advertising and lobbyists, our democracy has become sort of commercialized, to say the least, and we don't wind up, which is why a lot of people prior to Trump were already turned off to the whole system. The system was corrupt. You kept hearing the system was corrupt. Sure, it was corrupt. Capitalist democracy, capitalism corrupts the democracy. And I flip those words around because in the past I've always said democratic capitalism, but it's really not it's not democratic capitalism, it's capitalist democracy. And the capitalism subsumes the democracy and is way, way, way more powerful. And in fact, there's an interesting thing in Hannah Arendt's book about this, about how money and power go together. The book is called On Tyranny. We still got it up there. It's on tyranny, and part of us living with tyranny has been the tyranny against slaves and women. So we've got like 250 years of tyrannical behavior towards black people that we brought to this country as slaves, and then another 100 years or plus just trying to keep them under the thumb as much as possible, and an ongoing history against women, which has been really coming to the fore right now again this week as we speak, with the Supreme Court getting ready to get to a gut Roe versus Wade, which has led to a big rally of blue-hatted, not pink-hat, but blue-hatted people who are totally against abortion in Washington, and they see that they're going to overturn a Roe versus Wade any second now. Supreme Court Justice Sonia, what's her last name here? Sonia Meitner? I think I blew that. Is very upset about this and is starting to speak out, and we'll see how far that goes. The history of democracy, he says in the prologue here, is a history of the decline and fall. And in a sense, we can see that day by day just reading the newspapers, which is in our own state. Today, we see it sort of dribbling away. And then over the course of the century, we saw the decline and fall of democracy as a result of after World War I, after World War II, and also in Eastern Europe, especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So European democracies collapsed into right-wing authoritarianism and fascism in the 20s and 30s throughout Germany, and that's the main impetus of this book here that he's going to be talking about. He said this is really interesting here. Both fascism and communism were responses to globalization. Now, we've had this globalization going on before the 70s. This globalization started at the beginning of the century. It went really full force around the early, mid-70s. But the globalization, talk about inequalities, well, the inequalities were more obvious in other parts of the world. But in America, we had this really growing middle class from the end of World War II up through the 50s into the 60s. And in the early 70s, as the multinational corporations came about, prior to that, there wasn't even the word multinational corporation. They were called transnational corporations. So the multinational corporations, as they grew and they globalized, well, what got globalized was the money, the ability of the money to go overseas and find cheap labor. The unions never followed with the globalization. So the American unions thought they were really on top of things, and they didn't want to collaborate with the European unions, so they rejected the European unions, stayed on their own, and as a result have been crushed since 1975. They've been absolutely crushed. But the point is, the fascism and communism were responses to globalizations as a result of the inequality and the result of things being more upset. People tend to then go to more authoritarian types of government. Another statement here which blows me out is fascists reject reason, denying objective truth in favor of a glorious myth articulated by the leader who claims to be giving voice to the people. This is Trump in a box. Trump gave voice to the people. As I've said before, he didn't develop his marketing plan, his program. What he did was he put a half a dozen people in a little boiler room, had them listening to right-wing radio all day long and writing down all the questions that were coming in from the viewers in the southern and midwestern states on these right-wing stations. And that's where his whole platform came from. Everything out of his mouth. The attack on immigrants, the attack against women, one attack after another was a response to all of these people's questions that were coming into him. So he spent a couple of $100 developing his platform, which wasn't really his whole platform is himself, but the words that come out of his mouth were a result of this little deal that he did, which hardly cost him anything, whereas everybody else was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. The point of the book, he's saying, is that the Founding Fathers demand that we examine the history to understand the deep sources of the tyranny. Democracy will easily yield into fascism, and that's about where we're at today. So 20 lessons from the 21st century, 20 lessons from the 20th century, and the idea is become active, become conscious, and become a deliberate participant. Another source I'll use on and off is going to be Tom Hartman. Tom Hartman's famous saying at the end of his show is, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy is not a spectator sport. In a sense, we've all become couch potatoes, myself included. I'm not going to keep myself out of that. I definitely like to sit on the couch and watch some shows at night and just relax and blank out. But in between that, I do pay attention to the politics. So I'm here, we're doing this. Democracy is not a spectator sport. So the next show, we'll do one week, we'll do the show on Do Not Obey in Advance, and we'll look at what he says in the book here, and we'll see if we can find some references to the other sources, and we'll do that throughout. So that's the plan for this segment of the show. So each one of these will be called On Tyranny. I'll do other shows, hopefully, just on maybe news segments or positive things that are happening or book reviews. I have a half a dozen of the things in my head that I want to do. But we're going to focus on tyranny. We're going to do that every week for the next 20 weeks. Let's see if I keep my word. Peace, patience, persistence, and hopefully we'll see you next week.